Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for tuning in at the iLaw Lunchtime Webinar Series, Litigation Funding. We have created this 40-minute introductory webinar targeted for both lawyers and non-lawyers like you who would like to learn about the basic knowledge of litigation funding over lunch. Today, we're pleased to have our litigator, Tom Clark, and our guest speaker, Robert Hanna from Augusta Ventures, who will be sharing some pointers and basic knowledge on claims and litigation funders. We'll also have a Q&A section at the end, which our speakers will try to answer your questions live if time allows. You can choose to participate anonymously when submitting the questions. Now, Tom, would you like to start us off by telling us the overview of what litigation funding is?
Brief overview of what litigation funding is, just for those people who are not aware of it. Essentially, litigation funding is a funding option for predominantly claimants. It is essentially, if you have a litigation or an arbitration, then it is a funding option now available to you. Essentially, it's been around for around 10 years. It came in with the Jackson reforms, started off quite slowly, and we've seen a real revolution in certainly in the last 5 or 6 years. It's become very prevalent to the point now where clients come to us and say that they want litigation funding for a case. 5, 6 years ago, it was more about education and letting clients know that it existed. I think there was some wariness around it, but yes, certainly the last 5 years, it has become very mainstream. In basic terms, litigation funding is where a third party, essentially an investment fund or a funder like Augusta, will pay for all or some of the legal costs of pursuing a claim in return for a share of the winnings if the claim is successful. The funding is non-recourse. That means that if the claim is unsuccessful, the claimant pays nothing in costs and the funder's investment is written off. And this is the inherent risk that the funder takes when funding a claim. In the case of adverse costs being awarded, where the case is lost, the claimant will still pay nothing because a funding package will invariably include a policy of after the event insurance. So this package essentially of litigation funding and insurance eliminates the cost risk of litigating cases. Now, this, I'm sure, all sounds great to a claimant, and one might wonder why a funder might want to get involved in this. And the reason is a good legal claim is worth money. Essentially now, good legal claims are, it's an asset class. And funders know that if they fund cases on a portfolio basis, then on average, they will make money for the funder. So what type of claims will a funder look for? Well, as I said before, essentially they're looking for good claims, cases that they will win. And this means speculative cases will not be taken on. Essentially, we're talking about claimant cases here. The exception to that is where a defendant has a counterclaim which is greater than the claim. However, I mean, in all my years, I've not seen a funder fund a counterclaim. I'm sure people might write in after this telling me that they've experienced of that, and Robert might have some experience as well. But essentially, you're looking at claimant claims, and you're looking at invariably claims which are of high value, where there's a pot of money, there's some damages to recover, something where the funder will be able to take their success fee and their capital back from. So there needs to be enough in the case. In my experience, with usually talking several £1 million in damages in a monetary claim, there are funders out there who will get involved for cases much less than that. The market is still maturing, and I think the good thing is for claimants, essentially, there are funders for all sorts of claims out there and of different values. But I think as a general rule, you need to have a claim of several £1 million in order to proceed. There are various benefits that come out of litigation funding. The main one, well, there's several: access to justice. Essentially, in the past, claimants who may not have been able to bring a claim because they just didn't have the financial resources now have a platform in order to litigate. So it kind of evens up, it levels up the playing field in terms of the finances in order to litigate the claim. In my experience as well, having a litigation funder on your side and having a case insured strengthens your claim, not only because you've got the financial firepower to actually take the case all the way to trial, and it's also because you've essentially had another team of experts who've done the DD on the case, who've got their own QCs, who have given it the green light to proceed. So it's a vote of confidence. So essentially, the person or the lawyers on the other side have had looking at the case and thinking, well, there's 2 or 3 sets of lawyers who've looked at this case. So, there obviously is some strength in this case. If it's a corporate claimant bringing the claim, then essentially the litigation funding has no impact on a corporate's cash flow status or EBITDA. So essentially, it's off balance sheet, which can be very attractive to CFOs, FDs, and there is talk about legal counsel and litigation departments in-house becoming profit centers for the firm. For businesses. So, I mean, that's an interesting angle. So that's an introduction to litigation funding. At this point, I'm just going to hand over to Robert. I'm really pleased that we've got Robert here because he's a managing director of Augusta, a very good litigation funder, who and what we can get is some kind of practical input from Robert in terms of the cases that they look for, the DD process, and what claimants can expect. So I'll hand over to Robert. Perhaps, Robert, you could just introduce your firm first and then go on to that question, please.
Great, Tom, thank you. And look, I don't really want to start off by criticizing what you said, but we actually have funded a counterclaim. So
there you go. I knew it. I'm sure someone's going to write it anyway, so there you go.
There you go. Okay, look, I'm not going to have this as a big marketing push for Augusta, despite us being a truly great litigation funder. We have offices in Sydney, Toronto, and of course London. We fund commercial claims. We do specialize in various areas. We have a very good team in group actions. We have a very good team in competitions, competition claims. Also what we call bulk claims, which are mass consumer claims, also infrastructure, construction and energy, and of course arbitration. But generally it's just commercial claims. Typically, I've always thought of litigation funding as a risk management tool for claimants. And I think that has certainly been the case for the last 8-9 years. It allows the claimant to take as much or as little risk off the table and pursue claims. And as Tom said, this does allow access to justice, does allow the leveling of playing fields when you get your David stroke Goliath type situation. I think interesting in the last year with this dreadful virus that we've all been living through, we've got to the situation where claimants are looking to funders as a source of liquidity. And I'll give you an example. A couple of months ago, I was speaking to the CFO of a FTSE 100 company, and they ordinarily would have never had considered funding or taking funding for pursuing their claims. And the CFO turned around to me and said, look, I don't want to waste my cash funding legal expenses. Now, I hope he doesn't think he's going to waste our cash funding his legal expenses. But I think what it brings to mind is that everyone is very conscious of keeping their own cash. And therefore, if there is a way of using someone else's cash, they will certainly consider it. I also think, rather interestingly, law firms are looking to funders from a liquidity point of view as well. And please forgive all the lawyers in the audience, but I've always thought that the structure that lawyers have for their companies are rather strange, in as much as they will always pay the cash out to the partners at the end of the year. Therefore, if a claimant doesn't pay at the end of the month, then for some law firms that can be a serious event. And the one thing I think of, well, one of the things that funders do guarantee is that lawyers will be paid at the end of the month. So that's something that they should consider.
And in terms of capital strength, I mean, we've noticed, I mean, it seems like every month there's a new funder who comes to us saying that they've raised some money, or they're interested in funding cases. In terms of capital strength, I mean, what should we, I know that's part of the litigation, the AFL, is it, that you remember?
ALF.
ALF. I mean, what kind of safeguards are there for claimants to make sure that funders have got the money, essentially? Well,
look, I think that's one of the crucial parts of litigation funding. A claimant doesn't want to engage with a funder and then realize that the funder ends up running out of cash halfway through the case. We are one of the founding members of ALF, Association of Litigation Funders, and most of the other professional funders are members of ALF as well. So we think this is it's a self-regulatory organization that has been set up at the request of the Ministry of Justice, and we think it provides a strong base for funders to work from and some kind of comfort to lawyers and claimants who use funding. So really, it's important to make sure the funder has sufficient cash. And I think if you look on the list of ALF, you'll see, you know, the professional organizations certainly have large numbers of capital to put into cases.
Yeah, yeah. So as an example, if we have a client who comes to us, we run through the funding options available, they're interested in litigation funding, we send them over to you. How does the process look from there?
Okay, well, strangely enough, the biggest or the most important thing for claimants is to see how quickly they can get a decision from the funder as to whether they're going to accept that case. And from our point of view, we are very good, we believe, at saying no. We'll look at a case and we'll see whether this is something that we are able to fund. And if we think it isn't, we will say no very quickly. Yeah. And that might seem harsh, but it's much better to say no quickly rather than a long maybe, so to speak. We will then, once we've looked at the case, we will come back with a quotation as to what our costs are going to be. That will be then sent out to the claimant, and they'll decide whether they're comfortable with that quotation. Once again, you know, I passionately believe that every claimant should know what the cost is of litigation funding, and then they can make a decision, an informed decision, as to whether they think is a fair price for the financing or not. We are purely an option. It's certainly never a hard sell. It's just, this is an option. Is this fairly priced for you? Once the claimant has agreed with accepted the funding terms, we will then complete our internal due diligence. We've taken the view that we do the vast majority of our due diligence in-house, and so we've got the largest team in London of experienced lawyers carrying out the internal due diligence. We will also once we've done our initial due diligence, contact a silk or a retired judge to get an external view as well. The case will then go to our investment committee, and we approve the case.
Yeah. I mean, certainly for us, I think it's from the litigator side, it's certainly, I think the two things for us are turnarounds, turning around quickly, because our clients expect that, and we're quite often under pressure to get the case moving. We have limitation deadlines to comply with, and I think the second thing is transparency and just kind of clear pricing. Because I've seen some funding agreements which are just so complicated, and I think if trying to explain it to a client is a bit of a mission. So I think yes, that transparency and kind of pricing being as simplified as possible is very important.
Yeah. Look, I think at the end of the day, we've got to show the client how much they will get at the end of a case in various scenarios as to what the settlements are, but also how much the lawyer is going to take and how much we, the funder, is going to take, and also tell them how much money they could lose. So yeah, a lot of clients can take all of the risk off the table, or sometimes they'll fund part of it. But I think it's important. Look, we are fortunate enough to have one of the world's largest credit funds behind us. So we've got a big checkbook, if you will. We do want to fund cases. We want to fund good cases. So we work with good lawyers such as yourself, Tom. But then we will be very innovative. If there are if there are issues with a case, and if I'm being totally candid, every case we look at, there are issues with them. We will try and use our experience to get comfortable with that case. And typically we will work with the lawyer to try and get around the issues we find. We want to fund cases. And I think that's important. So we at the end of the day, once we've agreed terms with the client, we're all on the same side, and we want to be able to fund the case.
Yeah. And where do you think the opportunities are with litigation funding going forward? Because you've seen this rapid kind of growth of litigation funding in all sorts of areas. Where do you? I mean, we're seeing opportunities in group action claims, and we're involved in a couple of those very large claims at the moment. And we can see more on the horizon, and certainly we can see that as a real great opportunity for litigation funding, because you can essentially go to a client and say, here's the opportunity, here's the litigation opportunity, we don't need any of your money, essentially it's funded and it's insured, and you will receive, if we win, X% of the damages. It's quite an easy, nice play to make. And I think that's a real opportunity.
Yeah, look, I think it's interesting, as you said earlier, Tom. This litigation funding is a new asset class. I think it's amazing how few people fully appreciate what it can provide.
Yeah.
I think in the last year, 18 months, more people are aware of it. I think our friends at Burford have been the poster child of the industry. They've got litigation funding onto the front pages of the financial press.
Yeah.
And so you've seen CFOs are now pretty much aware of it, and therefore they will go to their lawyers and they will ask their lawyers to tell them about it. So I think this is the big development. Lawyers now realize that they have to engage with the funders. They have to understand how we work. And so I see that, unfortunately, in the last 18 months and going forward, there is certainly more litigation. If you speak to any good litigation lawyer, they'll tell you that they've never been busier. Yeah. That is not, unfortunately, going to go away. There is going to be more insolvency, and unfortunately, that's a good area for litigation funders. So there is going to be more opportunity for litigation funders. You are going to get more corporates engaged, looking to find out how much we price our cash at. And so, someone said the other day, it's going to be the golden age for litigation funders. I think that's totally true. I also think it's beginning to evolve. So you are going to start getting securitization from investors into litigation funding. You are going to get the ability to have a secondary market. It's in its infancy at the moment, but you will start seeing people or funders start to trade the assets that they have, which will mean for investors that gives them a greater ability to come in and invest, because the liquidity won't be such an issue for them.
Yeah, and I guess you're going to see kind of specialist funders pop up as well, who, I mean, I guess we're already seeing it with, like Manolay just involved in insolvency litigation. I guess you're going to see more specialization. You might get a funder in just group claims. I do think the market has got a long way to go. I do think, as you say, we're just probably at the start of this, and it will be the golden age for funders. And we're already seeing, funders with an appetite for litigation, not only in England and Wales, America, and Europe, but also, in Africa. We're seeing litigation down there, and funders wanting to get involved in that. Mining cases, commodities, bilateral arbitrations, and yeah, I mean, it just goes on and on. But I still find it interesting, even now, talking to lawyers from overseas and talking about litigation funding, and it really just there's absolutely no knowledge of it whatsoever. So I think we are still on this kind of education.
Yeah, look, Tom, I think you're right, and I think the key thing is to remember that this will only work if it's beneficial to the client. So, as you said again earlier, you've got to be transparent. The client's got to understand what they're letting themselves in for. What is their maximum downside? What can they expect on the various settlement scenarios that they've seen? You're seeing, we did a great case. I can speak about it because it's public, but we funded a case which involved a village in Africa that had been allegedly poisoned by a mining company, and that's a good thing, because the villagers in the village would never have been able to get access to justice if it wasn't for the funder. So the funder is allowing access to justice, is leveling playing fields, is can be put to good causes. There is going to be more ESG type cases that will be funded. So I think there is a lot of good that our industry is doing and can do going forward.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm already seeing a few questions come in. So perhaps, as I know that we're on a very short timescale, I'll pass back to Bonnie, and Bonnie can start putting those questions to us.
Sure. Thank you, Tom and Bobby, for your presentation. It's very both informative and interesting. And as Tom mentioned, we'll now be opening for questions. And if you would like to ask anything, you can use the Q&A button to submit your questions below, and our speakers will try to answer them live for you. And I see that there's a question now from Daniel. I guess this is towards for Bobby. Has Augusta had any experiences with litigation funding in Latin America? And if yes, are there any particular issues or aspects you think need to be taken into consideration when funding a claim in Latin America?
Look, thank you for the question. We have funded some cases out in Latin America, but it's not litigation, it's arbitration. So from our point of view, we look at every case on its merits, and if the case has sufficient merit, we will be prepared to fund it. as far as the jurisdictions are concerned, we're certainly not an expert in local Latin American litigation. So unfortunately, we haven't funded any Latin American litigation. But as I say, if it's through the arbitration process, then we would be happy to consider that.
Perfect. We have a different question now from Samia Rock. Good morning and greetings from New York. Also, I focus in Brazil and Latin America, and he would like to know or understand how to access funds whom are interested in evaluating arbitration proceedings or lawsuits. Tom or Bobby, which one would you like to take on?
Well, if I'm just on the marketing side, I'd be very happy to speak to them offline, and we can go through our process and have a look at whatever cases they have out in Brazil / Latin America.
Yeah, I mean, I was giving a talk down in Sao Paulo last year. It was actually on blockchain and cryptocurrency tracing. But a revelation for me was that there's a big market for litigation funding down in Latin America. There's already a few players down there, and I've done no litigation down there, but my colleague. Contact Warren Gluck from Holland and Knight in New York has seen a lot of litigation down there, and uses funders down there. So it's a big market, and very happy to answer any questions or deal with any queries offline. Both Bobby and I are very happy to do that.
If you'd like to reach to our speakers, the email address can be found on the agenda. We have another extra question from Patrick, and I guess this is targeted. Oh, this is for Bobby as well. On a typical case, what percentage of the legal fees and costs does Augusta pay?
Pay? Probably charge, I would have thought. Look, we charge, and I think we're pretty much in tandem with a lot of funders, but we will charge a multiple of the capital that we lend, or a share of the damages. And it really depends on the size. But as a rough rule of thumb, and don't hold me to this, but the minimum would be we want our money back plus a 2 times multiple, 2 to 2.5 times multiple, and then that will go up. But I think it's important to remember that is only on capital that is deployed. So if the case settles earlier, then we may look at a case of £10 million claim for whatever, and there's £1 million of funding required. It may settle once we've only deployed £500,000, and so you'd only be charged on that £500,000. And I think that's important to remember.
I should say good morning, Patrick Boyle. I've just seen who asked that question. Good morning, Patrick. Straight to the point on the financials. Good to see.
No, quite right. Look, at the end of the day, it's important to see whether the financing is fairly priced or not.
Thank you, Bobby and Tom. I've got a few previously submitted questions from our audience, and I guess this one is for you, Tom. The question is, what other funding options are there?
So the other options that the client has is to pay our hourly rates on a private fee basis, the kind of traditional model, or a contingent retainer where the lawyer barrister acts on essentially a no-win, no-fee basis, or something in between. Perhaps they're paid half the rate as they go along, with the rest dependent on success. So those are the other 2 options you have. Something I don't know much about, and I've never had an experience of, is you can actually borrow money to fight litigation, so recourse instead of non-recourse. But I mean, with the advent of litigation funding, why would you get involved in that? I wouldn't see the point of doing that. So those are the options.
Tom, can I just say on that? I think in times gone by, banks could provide loans, recourse loans to their clients to pursue litigation. Certainly, our understanding is that those lines of credit have been withdrawn, and banks are not, as far as I know, in the business of funding litigation.
Right. Right. You just don't think it exists anymore?
No, I think obviously it would depend on the client, but we certainly don't see that as a viable alternative.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tom and Bobby. I've got another question for Bobby. How has COVID affected litigation financing, if at all? And there's a following up questions on whether you think the litigation funding is mature as a market.
Well, if I answer back to front, I really don't think the market is mature. As I said earlier, I think it's only beginning to begin the maturation process. So we're still very early in it, and I think there's a long way to go. I think COVID has already created more litigation. There's no doubt about it. And just for the record, I'm not a lawyer, I'm a mere finance guy. But if you speak to any good litigation lawyer, they will tell you that, as I've said earlier, they are as busy as they've ever been. We know our pipeline of cases has never been bigger. It's probably 2 or even 3 times the size it used to be. And the interesting thing is you're working with the larger, and some would say better lawyers, which is incredible. So everyone, lots of litigation lawyers are now engaging in litigation funding, and I just see there's going to be more and more business coming down the track. Tom, thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, nothing more to add on that. I think, yeah, I agree with you. So I was just looking at the other question there. It's just come in from Buddy Eastwood. Do you see any countries in Europe making use of litigation funding? Example, Ireland, Spain, Nordics. It's really interesting, actually, how our European partners haven't really taken up the litigation funding option. Yeah, when I talk to lawyers from those jurisdictions, it still seems a long way off. Yeah, it's an interesting, perhaps Ireland, perhaps I see it. I don't know, Bobby, do you have any feeling on that?
Yeah, look, we've got strong views. We see quite a lot of interest from Europe. We do quite a lot of our business in Germany, particularly, and Spain. Holland is also a good country to litigate in because the costs are a little bit less extortionate, Tom, sorry, than England. Sorry for that. And also, in fact, Poland as well. We are beginning to do a bit of business in Poland. So we're excited about Europe. We think there is a big demand out there.
Thank you, Tom and Bobby. I've just got another question from Sam. He's asking, Robert, what was your own journey into funding? Did you previously work as a commercial lawyer, as he's going to be a law student in London from September, and he would like to be just interested to learn about the routes into the side of the profession?
Well, that's Sam. Good luck. That's what I say. You're going the right way around it. I am, unfortunately, as I said, I'm not a lawyer. I was in a little bank, for those who can remember it, called Merrill Lynch, and I used to lend money to hedge funds, and they had very sophisticated trading strategies. And then when I saw the trading strategy for litigation financing, I was very attracted to that. I think it's a very interesting space, and it's just bringing money to areas where, if you can get a sufficiently diversified pool of cases, you should be able to provide a reasonably good return for your investors.
Thank you, Bobby, and thank you, Tom. Thank you for everyone for participating in this live webinar. If you have any other questions on litigation funding that you would like to discuss with Tom or Bobby, you can email them directly. And as I mentioned, the email address can be found on the agenda. Thank you so much for participating, and we hope to see you again soon on the next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.